Every time you fill up a car with petrol, every time a factory burns fuel to run its machines, every time an airplane takes off anywhere on Earth, a transaction happens that most people never think about. The oil that powers that engine was almost certainly purchased in US dollars, not in the currency of the country where the oil was drilled, not in the currency of the country where it was refined, not in the currency of the country where it was burned, in dollars. This arrangement, so familiar that it feels like a law of nature, is actually a political agreement. A deal made in a desert in 1974 between an American president and a Saudi king. A deal that created what we now call the Petrodollar System. And that system, 50 years old, quietly running beneath every energy transaction on Earth, is now, for the first time in its history, beginning to crack. Here at Historic Finance, we have already shown you how the dollar became the world's reserve currency. We have shown you how America uses financial systems as weapons through sanctions. We have shown you how the IMF uses debt as leverage over developing nations. Today we're going to show you the mechanism that makes all of those other systems possible. Because without the petrodollar, the dollar's dominance does not exist. Without the dollar's dominance, the sanctions have no teeth. Without the sanctions, American financial power looks very different. The petrodollar is the foundation stone, and someone is now pulling at it. To understand the petrodollar, you need to go back to one Sunday evening in August 1971. President Richard Nixon appeared on American television and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through every finance ministry and central bank on Earth. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. Temporarily. It has now been over 50 years. To understand why this was so significant, you need to understand the Bretton Woods system, the global financial architecture that had been in place since 1944. After World War II, the world needed a stable monetary system. The agreement reached at Bretton Woods was elegant in its simplicity. Every major currency would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This meant that any country holding US dollars could walk up to the US government and exchange them for gold at that fixed rate. The dollar was as good as gold, literally. This gave the world enormous confidence in the dollar, and it gave America an extraordinary privilege. America could print dollars. Other countries needed dollars to trade. So America was essentially borrowing from the entire world at zero interest, simply by printing currency that the world wanted to hold. But Bretton Woods had a fatal flaw built into it. For the system to work, the world needed to trust that America actually had enough gold to back all the dollars in circulation. And through the 1960s, that trust began to erode, for a very simple reason. America was spending far more than it was earning. The Vietnam War was costing billions. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society domestic programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty, were costing billions more. America was printing dollars to pay for all of it. By the late 1960s, there were far more dollars in the world than there was gold in Fort Knox to back them. Foreign governments, particularly France, began to notice. French President Charles de Gaulle was openly contemptuous of what he called America's exorbitant privilege. In 1965, he sent a French battleship to New York Harbor loaded with dollars and demanded gold in return. He was not alone. Germany, Switzerland, Britain all began converting their dollar reserves to gold. The U.S. gold reserves were draining fast. By August 1971, Nixon faced a choice. Either devalue the dollar significantly, admitting the game was up, or break the promise entirely, end the convertibility of dollars to gold. He broke the promise. The Bretton Woods system was dead. And with it, the primary reason the world had to hold U.S. dollars. America needed a new answer to a very urgent question. If dollars were no longer backed by gold, if anyone holding dollars could no longer exchange them for anything real, why would the world keep holding dollars? The answer came from an unlikely source. Not from Wall Street, not from the Federal Reserve, from the desert. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo shocked the world. OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries, dominated by Arab nations, cut off oil supplies to the United States and Western Europe as punishment for supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight. Petrol queues stretched for miles. Factories shut down. Western economies plunged into recession. America had a vulnerability it had not fully understood before. It depended on Arab oil, and Arab nations were willing to use that dependency as a weapon. Nixon's national security advisor, the brilliant and ruthless Henry Kissinger, saw in this crisis not just a problem, but an opportunity. If oil was the one commodity the entire world needed above all others, and if America could control how oil was bought and sold, then America had found its replacement for gold. The plan Kissinger developed was audacious in its simplicity, and it would reshape the global economy for the next half-century. In June 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon flew to Saudi Arabia for secret negotiations. The terms America offered King Faisal were straightforward. America would provide Saudi Arabia with two things that money could not easily buy elsewhere. First, military protection. The United States would guarantee the security of the Saudi royal family and the Saudi state. American weapons, American military training, American defense commitments. In a region surrounded by instability, revolutionary Iran to the east, hostile Arab nationalist movements across the region, this was not a small thing. It was survival insurance for a monarchy sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. Second, economic partnership. America would help Saudi Arabia recycle its enormous oil revenues into U.S. Treasury bonds and American financial markets. The Saudis would accumulate almost unimaginable wealth from oil sales. America would give them a safe, stable, high-yield place to park that wealth. In return, America asked for two things. First, Saudi Arabia would price all oil sales exclusively in U.S. dollars. Every barrel, every buyer, every transaction, dollars only. Second, Saudi Arabia would use its enormous influence within OPEC to ensure that every other OPEC nation did the same. The deal was struck. It was not announced publicly. There was no press conference. No treaty signed in public view. This arrangement, which would become the financial foundation of American global power, was conducted in secret and has never been fully declassified. Let us trace the mechanism step by step. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Step 1. Nigeria produces oil. Japan wants to buy that oil. Japan does not pay Nigeria in Japanese yen. Japan does not pay in Nigerian naira. Japan pays in US dollars. Step 2. To get those dollars, Japan must first earn them through exports, through financial transactions, through its own economic activity priced in dollars. Every major economy in the world is therefore constantly working to earn dollars, because dollars are what you need to buy the energy that runs your economy. Step 3. Nigeria receives those dollars for its oil. But Nigeria does not need billions of dollars sitting in a bank account. Nigeria needs schools, hospitals, roads, military equipment. So Nigeria spends those dollars on goods and services priced in dollars from companies that accept dollars. Step 4. Saudi Arabia's Suez, which produces far more oil than it can spend domestically, accumulates enormous dollar surpluses. Those surpluses get recycled back into U.S. Treasury bonds, American real estate, and American financial markets. The dollars flow to Saudi Arabia, then back to America. The result is a system of extraordinary elegance from America's perspective. The entire world must hold dollars to participate in the global energy market. That demand for dollars keeps the dollar strong. A strong dollar means America can borrow cheaply, because the world wants to hold dollar assets. Cheap borrowing means America can run deficits that would destroy any other currency. And those deficits fund the military and financial infrastructure that enforces the system. The petrodollar is a perpetual motion machine for American financial power. Here is where the historic finance perspective becomes crucial. For wealthy countries like Japan, Germany, or South Korea, the obligation to hold dollars is manageable. They export enough high-value goods to earn the dollars they need. For developing countries that export raw materials at low prices and import manufactured goods at high prices, the dollar system is a permanent structural disadvantage. Ghana exports cocoa. That cocoa is priced in dollars. But the price of cocoa is set on commodity exchanges in London and New York, not in Accra. Ghana has no pricing power over its own primary export. Meanwhile, Ghana imports fuel, medicine, machinery, all priced in dollars. When the dollar strengthens, everything Ghana imports becomes more expensive. When commodity prices fall, Ghana earns fewer dollars. The combination, fewer dollars coming in, more dollars needed to go out, is a balance of payments crisis, which is exactly the situation that sends countries to the IMF, as we showed in our last video. The petrodollar system, the IMF conditionality system, and the sanction system are not three separate mechanisms. They are three components of the same architecture. Each one reinforces the others. The petrodollar system faced its first serious test just 5 years after it was created. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah, the American-backed monarch, and replaced him with Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic. One of the new government's first acts was to announce that Iran would no longer accept dollars for oil. America's response was swift and instructive. Iran was immediately excluded from the dollar-based financial system. American assets in Iran were frozen, sanctions were imposed. Iran found itself cut off from international financial markets. The message to every other oil-producing nation was clear. Deviate from the petrodollar system, and you will be financially isolated. The consequences are severe. The protection America offers comes with a condition, and that condition is non-negotiable. In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein made an announcement that received very little attention in Western media at the time. Iraq would begin selling its oil in euros instead of dollars. 18 months later, the Bush administration began making the case for the invasion of Iraq, citing weapons of mass destruction that were never found. Now, was the Iraq War caused by Saddam's euro oil decision? That is a claim that requires careful handling. The official reasons given for the war, weapons of mass destruction, were false. The weapons did not exist. That is documented and acknowledged. The real motivations for the Iraq War are still debated by serious historians. Oil interests, regional geopolitics, unfinished business from the first Gulf War, neoconservative ideology, all played roles. But here is what is documented and beyond dispute. When American forces entered Baghdad in April 2003, one of the first acts of the Coalition Provisional Authority was to switch Iraqi oil sales back to dollars. Whether the euro switch was a cause of the war or simply a casualty of it, the result was the same. Iraq went back to dollars. The petrodollar system was restored. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi proposed something audacious at an African Union summit. He called for the creation of a unified African currency, the gold dinar, which African nations would use to sell their oil and other resources, bypassing the dollar entirely. He proposed that African nations stop selling oil in dollars and demand payment in this new gold-backed currency. He was actively lobbying other African leaders to support the plan. Several were interested. In 2011, NATO, led by France, Britain, and the United States, intervened militarily in Libya's civil war. Gaddafi was removed from power and killed. Hillary Clinton's emails, released under Freedom of Information requests, include a memo from a senior advisor noting that among the motivations for French involvement in the Libyan intervention was Gaddafi's gold dinar proposal, which threatened French financial interests in Francophone Africa. Again, correlation is not causation. Libya had a genuine civil war. NATO had genuine humanitarian concerns. The picture is complex, but the pattern is consistent enough to notice. Countries that credibly threaten the petrodollar system tend to find themselves facing serious problems. Whether that is coincidence or policy is a question each viewer must answer for themselves, based on the evidence. Through all of this, through Iran, Iraq, Libya, Saudi Arabia remained the anchor of the petrodollar system. Why? The answer is the deal itself. Saudi Arabia has received 50 years of American military protection. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain, minutes from Saudi territory. American weapon systems protect Saudi airspace. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, a direct threat to Saudi Arabia itself, American forces expelled the Iraqis and restored the regional order. For the Saudi royal family, the petrodollar deal has been extraordinarily good value. In exchange for pricing oil in dollars, they have received the most powerful security guarantee on earth. And the hundreds of billions of dollars they have recycled into U.S. Treasury bonds have generated steady returns for Saudi sovereign wealth. The arrangement has been mutually beneficial at the state level. The costs have been paid by others, by developing countries trapped in dollar dependency, by populations living under the American-backed authoritarian regimes that the security umbrella protects. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. The Western response was the most comprehensive financial sanctions package in history. Within days, the U.S. and its allies froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. Dollars, euros, and other reserve currencies that Russia had accumulated over decades. Russia could no longer access its own savings. Now, as we covered in depth in our sanctions video, this was a powerful demonstration of Western financial power. But it was also something else. It was a demonstration to every other country in the world of what the dollar system can do to you if America decides you are an enemy. China watched, Saudi Arabia watched, India watched, Brazil watched. Every country that holds significant dollar reserves, which is essentially every country, suddenly had to confront a question they had never seriously asked before. If America can freeze Russia's $300 billion with a phone call, what is stopping them from doing the same to us? The dollar's greatest strength, its universal acceptance, had just revealed its greatest danger. It was a weapon pointing in every direction, and the trigger was in Washington. In June 2024, something happened that would have been unthinkable 10 years earlier. Saudi Arabia allowed the 1974 petrodollar agreement to expire without renewal. This does not mean Saudi Arabia stopped selling oil in dollars overnight. The dollar remains dominant in Saudi oil transactions. But the exclusive arrangement, the commitment to accept only dollars, is gone. Saudi Arabia now officially accepts payment in multiple currencies. Chinese yuan, euros, other currencies. The exclusivity that was the foundation of the petrodollar system is over. This did not happen in a vacuum. In December 2022, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping in Riyadh for a Gulf-China summit. 18 Arab heads of state attended. Xi gave a speech explicitly calling for oil and gas trade to be settled in Chinese yuan. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran, enemies for decades, signed a normalization agreement brokered by China, not by America. China had inserted itself as the diplomatic power broker in a region America had dominated for 50 years. In the same year, Saudi Arabia began discussions about joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Chinese and Russian-led security bloc that is explicitly designed as an alternative to Western-led institutions. These are not isolated events. They are a pattern. And the pattern is clear. Saudi Arabia, the anchor of the petrodollar system, is hedging. China has been preparing for this moment for years. In 2018, China launched the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, a yuan-denominated oil futures market. For the first time, major oil producers could sell oil futures contracts in yuan on a Chinese exchange outside the dollar system entirely. In the first year of trading, the Shanghai Exchange captured roughly 14% of global oil futures trading volume. That is not dominant, but it is not trivial either for a market that did not exist before 2018. China has simultaneously been building the infrastructure for yuan internationalization, making it easier for other countries to hold and use yuan in international transactions. Currency swap agreements with over 40 countries. The cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, as an alternative to the SWIFT messaging system. Digital yuan development for cross-border payments. None of this has replaced the dollar, not even close. The dollar still accounts for nearly 90% of foreign exchange transactions. The yuan accounts for roughly 3%, but the direction of travel is clear, and in geopolitics, direction matters as much as current position. Saudi Arabia and China are not acting alone. India, the world's third largest oil importer, has been buying Russian oil at heavily discounted prices since the 2022 sanctions, paying in Indian rupees and UAE dirhams. Transactions that previously would have required dollars now do not. Brazil has signed a trade agreement with China to conduct bilateral trade directly in yuan and reais, bypassing the dollar entirely for transactions between the world's second and ninth largest economies. The BRICS nations, now expanded to include Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran, are actively developing payment systems that do not require dollar intermediation. Each individual transaction is small, but the aggregate represents hundreds of billions of dollars of trade that no longer flows through the dollar system. People who talk about the end of the petrodollar tend to fall into two camps. The first camp says it is already over, that the dollar is collapsing, that hyperinflation is coming next week, that you should buy gold and build a bunker. This camp is wrong. The dollar remains overwhelmingly dominant and will not collapse overnight. The second camp says nothing is changing, that the dollar has survived every challenge before and will survive this one. That China's yuan will never be a global reserve currency and the petrodollar system is as solid as ever. This camp is also wrong. The honest analysis is somewhere between these two positions. And the honest framing is not collapse, but erosion. The petrodollar system will not end on a specific day. It will gradually lose its absolute dominance. The dollar will go from being the only option to being the dominant option to being one option among several. That process may take decades, but it has already begun. Here is what gradual erosion of petrodollar dominance actually means in practice. For the United States, less global demand for dollars means the dollar weakens over time. A weaker dollar means imports become more expensive. For a country that imports enormous quantities of consumer goods, electronics, clothing, machinery, this means higher prices for American consumers. It also means the US government can no longer borrow as cheaply as it currently does. Higher borrowing costs mean either higher taxes, reduced spending, or larger deficits that themselves accelerate the problem. For oil-producing developing nations, the shift to multi-currency oil trade gives them more flexibility. Nigeria could sell oil in naira. Venezuela could sell in bolívares. This reduces their exposure to dollar volatility, but it also introduces new complexity. Without a single reserve currency to price everything in, commodity markets become more fragmented and harder to navigate. For China, gradual yuan internationalization strengthens China's geopolitical position. Countries that trade in yuan become more economically integrated with China. But China has its own constraints. A closed capital account, concerns about currency manipulation accusations, domestic financial risks that it cannot fully expose to international scrutiny. For emerging market countries currently trapped in dollar dependency, the transition period is the most dangerous. If the dollar weakens but remains dominant, dollar-denominated debts become harder to service as the dollar fluctuates unpredictably. Countries caught holding large dollar debts during a period of dollar volatility could face exactly the kind of balance of payments crises we described in our IMF video. Scenario 1. Managed transition. The dollar gradually loses its exclusive position over 20 to 30 years. A basket of reserve currencies, dollar, yuan, euro, possibly a new BRICS instrument, replaces the current dollar-only system. This is painful for America, but manageable for the world. Global trade continues. Financial systems adapt. Scenario 2. Disorderly break. A geopolitical shock, a Taiwan conflict, a major financial crisis, an American debt crisis, triggers a rapid flight from dollar assets. Foreign holders of U.S. Treasury bonds sell simultaneously. Treasury yields spike. The Federal Reserve must choose between printing money to buy bonds, causing inflation, or letting yields rise, causing recession. American borrowing costs explode. This scenario is the one that keeps serious economists awake at night. Which scenario plays out depends on decisions being made right now in Washington, Beijing, Riyadh, and Brussels. Decisions that are rarely front-page news but will shape the financial world your children inherit. We have made a strong case that the petrodollar system serves American interests at the expense of global fairness. But the defenders of the system have serious arguments worth engaging. First, stability. The petrodollar system, whatever its inequities, has provided 50 years of relative stability in global energy markets. Oil is a universally priced commodity. Buyers and sellers across 190 countries transact in a common unit. The system reduces transaction costs and currency risk for everyone. Second, the alternatives are worse for now. The yuan is not freely convertible. China's capital controls mean that countries holding yuan cannot easily spend or invest it globally. The euro exists, but the eurozone has its own structural vulnerabilities. No existing alternative offers the liquidity, depth, and institutional trust of the dollar system. Third, the US does provide real value. The dollar system comes with American military protection of global shipping lanes, American-backed international institutions, and American financial markets that provide deep, liquid investment options for countries recycling trade surpluses. These are not nothing. A world without those guarantees is not obviously better. These are real arguments. The current system has real benefits. The question is whether those benefits are equitably distributed, and the evidence strongly suggests they are not. Let us come back to that gas station. The next time you pay for fuel, wherever you are on Earth, remember what is actually happening. You are participating in a system designed in a desert in 1974 between an American president and a Saudi king to solve America's problem of keeping the world attached to a currency that was no longer backed by gold. That system has worked spectacularly for 50 years. It has funded American military dominance, American borrowing, and American global influence on a scale that history has never seen before. It has also trapped developing countries in dollar dependency. It has contributed to the debt crises that sent Ghana, Argentina, and Pakistan to the IMF. It has given America the financial weapons that make its sanctions so devastating. It has allowed a country with 4% of the world's population to consume resources and run deficits that no other country could sustain. The petrodollar is not just a financial mechanism. It is the infrastructure of power. And for the first time in 50 years, that infrastructure is showing its age. Saudi Arabia is hedging. China is building alternatives. Russia has been expelled from the system and survived. BRICS is expanding. The yuan is rising, slowly but rising. We are not at the end of the petrodollar era, but we may be at the beginning of the end. And when that era ends, whether in 20 years or 50, it will reshape the global financial order more profoundly than anything since Bretton Woods. Here at Historic Finance, we will be watching every step, and we will be explaining exactly what it means for you. Every system of financial power has a mechanism behind it. Our job is to show you the mechanism. Thank you for watching Historic Finance. I will see you in the next one.